If you're nerdy and you know it, clap your hands. And then continue listening to this episode of Nerd Best Friends. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Nerd Best Friends. Thanks for listening. This is Analese, and I'm here with my best friend, Rob.
Hey, it's me, Rob, your best friend, your podcast host, and your craft beer enthusiast. This week on the Nerd Best Friends podcast, we are talking about all things Batman.
Okay, Rob, so before we get to Batman's best, let's start with the craft beer of the episode.
Craft beer of the episode this week, Clutch from Transmission Brewing. Never know if it's brewing, Brewco, brewing company, brewers. It is Transmission Brewing this time. They're in Ventura, California. This is a Munich-style Helles lager. It is one of many delicious beers that they have there. This one, I was turned on to this place by our friend Adam. A great facility. If you find yourself in Ventura, California, they've got a huge building that they share with a really delicious pizza place and salad bar. And they've got indoors and outdoor seating and patios. And it's a good time. All their beer is good. That's what we're drinking.
It is a delicious craft beer. I'm going to support you on that. Tried some myself yesterday. And I also want to give a big shout out to Topper's Pizza in Ventura. And one of the things that's coming along with breweries and just smart planning, if you find yourself in Ventura County, particularly in Ventura, California, this place is just genius with the pizza parlor on one side, big open seating area in the middle, and the brewery on the other. Just smart use of a building that used to be industrial and was already there. So find yourself there. Topper's Pizza is phenomenal. Transmission Brewery, I've been impressed the last few times I've gone.
That takes us to, in episodes past, we've been calling it nerd corrections, just assuming that by the very idea that we would have a nerd listener base, that we would be getting mail that would be like, actually, Jurassic Park was CGI was done by a different corporate. So we were kind of assuming that would happen. But in fact, the opposite has been true. So we're going to change the name of this segment from Nerd Corrections to Listener Mail. And a big part of that is because all of the feedback that we've received so far has been just so nice and supportive. I've seen some texts and some things from people that have listened to our shows, some friends of ours and things. And so it's just been real nice to get that, which is an opportunity to remind all those people, if you want to say something nice about the show, please, please, please go on to your podcatcher of choice. Whatever you're listening to us on, there will be a system there to rate the show if you want to give us that 5-star rating. You know, we're not looking to be the number one podcast in America or anything like that. But the more positive reviews that we get, the higher we'll move up on the list, and the more likely it is for someone to find us if they're looking for that good nerd content.
And let's be real, Rob, we actually do want those, messages as well. And as we wait for that feedback, I agree with you. I've been hearing many good comments from people who know us or have listened to the podcast. One of the purposes we talked about back in episode 1 was the whole purpose of this is to engage in these conversations, to really talk about the expanse of this nerd universe that pretty much anybody can be a nerd of anything, and to hear about all the things that people are nerdy about and starting to really embrace the idea like, I don't really follow comic books, but I will admit I'm a nerd of Game of Thrones. I'm a nerd of Lord of the Rings. I'm a nerd of Beverly Hillbillies, whatever it may be. So thank you for that feedback. Keep bringing it in. In terms of listener mail, one of the humblest pieces that I've heard so far is a few people telling me that they've added the nerdiest thing they did that day or that week in their family conversations or with their kids or with their spouses. So that's been really nice because that's certainly one of my favorite parts of the episode too.
That was some of the feedback that I got too. I was a friend of mine I was texting with, and he's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I told him what I was doing, and he replied with, "Is that the nerdiest thing you're doing this week?"
Wonderful. Keep the conversations going, listeners, and keep interacting with us.
Okay, we are getting into Batman. Yes,
Batman's best, or the best of Batman.
Of course, being the best is, by its very nature, a subjective list, right? So when I put this list together for the different categories that Annalise came up with, I just went with what struck me, maybe what stayed in my mind the most, or what, the first thing I thought of usually because it's kind of it's that headcanon for me. So like our first thing is going to be origin stories. And there's a million of them, and there's probably some that I haven't seen yet. that you might think is your best, but the ones that click into my mind, like, oh, if I had to go back and read a Batman origin story, which one would I read?
I do think this really signifies some of the differences you and I have in our nerdiness. As you started putting in notes about the episode and the best of, I started thinking, wow, I have read, viewed, know very little of the Batman universe, at least in comparison to you. So this is going to be learning experience for me, and I will really stick more on that pop culture, what has been really portrayed as Batman in the grander media that a average nerd like me in terms of Batman would be aware of. So this is going to be really good. And yes, we are starting with best origin story. So what do you got?
I don't know that anybody can absorb all that is Batman. Batman is so popular and there's so many iterations. Another thing I tried to do on this list was go through, you nerds, if you picture the bell curve of Batman, and over on the left side in the tiny thing, you've got just the campy 1966 Adam West Batman or Batman when he guest stars on Scooby-Doo. And then on the far right, you've got some of the others we're talking about, like Frank Miller Batman, just ridiculous out on the end, and a bunch of stuff in the middle. So I tried to cover a wide gamut of that as well. However, I will give a warning up front just because of the nature of some of the over-the-top Batman that gets kind of towards the end of that spectrum. This might have some language. It's either going to be one that you don't want your kids to listen to, or it's going to be the one where Analese, who edits these podcasts, figures out how to use the bleep button, which also might be fun. So with that disclaimer out of the way, I am going to start with an origin story, Batman Year One, which is a comic by Frank Miller. It was also adapted into an animated movie. HBO and Warner Brothers have been doing for, probably the last 10 years, a really cool thing where they take some of the really popular Batman arcs and they just translate it to an animated movie, almost word for word, line for line in a lot of cases, which is cool. It's a way for people to get access to that content that they don't have to search for a book that might be hard to find or out of print or expensive, depending on what edition it is. But a lot of these are reprinted. Batman Year One is a cool origin story because it is not the origin story of Batman. Like, it doesn't spend a lot of time. I don't remember it spending any time, but if it does, it doesn't spend a lot of time with the murder of Bruce Wayne's parents, right? That kind of goes out of the way. What this is instead is this is the first year of Bruce Wayne being Batman, where he's running around the city in like sweatpants and do-rag over his face and like a crowbar and trying to fight crime and figuring out what he's supposed to be doing out there. There's that learning curve that comes with it, right? Like when he falls off a building or when he gets punched through the windshield of a car and it hurts and he's got to figure out what the recovery looks like, and evolving his costume and his gadgets based on the failures he's having and the things that he's learning. It also has an interesting parallel story about young Jim Gordon in the Gotham City Police Department. He's a detective at that time and shows how he's coming up in the ranks of a corrupt Gotham City Police Department at the same time that Bruce Wayne is starting to be a vigilante. And it goes into some pretty dark places. Young Detective Jim is a guy who's always trying to do the right thing, but is surrounded at work and at home by just terrible, disgusting people. Like, I believe it's been years since I read it, but I remember correctly, his wife is just like a terrible alcoholic that hates him, and he has no kind of solace there. And at work, everybody is corrupt police officer that's either, on the take, letting people get away with things that they know is wrong. And he's powerless in all of these different areas. So the two stories kind of drive together as these two people who are trying to make a difference in a place that is just oppressively terrible, coming together and finding those parallel stories. It's an interesting book. So it's not a dwell on the childhood Bruce Wayne or anything like that. It's what would it, you don't just come out being Batman. There's got to be a little bit of a learning curve there. So it's an interesting read. I'm gonna say that.
Did you watch the series Gotham? I don't know, about
yes.
10, 15 years ago. Is that along the same lines? If I remember watching a few episodes of it, Gordon isn't the well-established police officer. He's actually like regular police officer on the beat, while Batman is also in between or on a rise. Is the same idea there? Same kind of timeline?
Yes, Gotham, or Gotham as we call it at my house, because the way they did the logo, it says Gotham and it comes at the screen slowly and the middle splits apart into like the point of view.
Yes.
So it looks like
Yes,
Gotham.
yes, yes.
So it is Jim Gordon's story. And it's not the same as this book, but it is the same idea of, oh, he's this new detective. He's finding out that everything is pretty terrible. There's this rise in psychopaths wearing weird costumes or doing weird gadgets and just these insane crimes. It's the story of Harvey Bullock, which is another, famous member of the Gotham Police Department who becomes his partner. Yeah, very similar. If you liked that, if you thought Gotham was a super cool show and you wanted to see where the ideas from that came from, Batman Year One by Frank Miller.
And that's a singular book, singular graphic novel?
You would get it in a collection. It came out in, who knows, usually it's a 6 or 7 issue series. Okay. But if you were to find it now, you'd get the collection for sure. Right. Or probably for free on your local library app like Hoopla. People who want to start getting into comics, don't sleep on your local library and how far they've come with their digital apps. You can find a lot of books, a lot of comics, a lot of stuff through your library right there at home already on your phone or your tablet or whatever.
Without having to actually go to the library. Yes, agreed.
Right.
So in terms of origin story, Batman Year One focuses on not just that deep-rooted Bruce Wayne was a child when his parents were killed. That's kind of we know this is a short little blip, and it focuses on as he invents
the origin of Batman from a dude running around in sweats and a tied-on mask to the cape and cowl crusader that we know.
Do you see origins of some of the villains that Batman eventually faces? Some of the more famous villains? Do you see the origins of the Joker, the origins of Penguin, or the origins of the Riddler?
I don't remember that being a big part of it. I had a couple days to prep. I didn't go back and read all of this stuff.
Right on. So you have a couple more on this list in terms of origin
Well, why don't you do yours, and then I'll tack those onto the ends as also ends.
So I went again with the more pop culture, the Batman movie starring Michael Keaton, and that was from 1988, I believe, or 1989. It's one of those 2 years, 1989, I believe. Why I chose this movie, one, I think it does a very good job of really introducing Batman's origin story. And if I remember correctly, because I did not go back and rewatch the entire film. I watched bits and pieces. You have some of that as he becomes Batman, but this movie then shifts back and forth. You learn his origin story as he's going through the things he's battling in this movie. But what's important about this in terms of Batman origins is for a lot of people like myself who haven't read books or comics or graphic novels or animated series, it's the first really serious take of Batman. Meaning this is the first of the darker movies, the darker superhero movies, the ones that studios were really reluctant to make in the 80s because we were used to the campy bam, pow, Batman and Robin of the 60s series. And even Superman in the 70s and 80s, they're not really heavy, dark movies. Everything's really brightly colored and the storyline just doesn't get really deep with those early Superman movies. Here's where we start to see an actual shift, and the movie made a lot of money. So all of a sudden it was the first time Batman was portrayed in this serious manner. It was a serious movie. It was a darker movie. A lot of the scenes are dark. There's heavy violence in it. Batman himself is a bit more broody than earlier versions of Batman, like the 1960s series with the bam, pow, and the happy music, and the Batmobile is a big tank of a car, and really portrayed Batman as having this.
It's got machine guns.
Well, yes, it's very violent.
It has gigantic machine guns that pop out of the fenders.
And Batman's this moody millionaire who has this deep, dark origin story. So you don't get the progression of, A to Z when he's Batman, but you do get the why he's Batman, what happened in his life, how he got to do what he does as a vigilante. And I think for the average, don't know a lot about Batman, it's a great start to be able to understand Batman as a whole, even though in later versions of the film, they keep touching the origin story in different ways. I think this one is the most successful because it was the first one to be able to do it in a real honest manner, being portrayed as not campy.
Another important origin that movie should get credit for is the Batman theme that Danny Elfman wrote for it. That theme carried over I think still today, like if you were to go to, a modern Batman, either animated movie or one of the Warner Brothers movies and listen to the theme, those like 3 notes are probably still in there. It definitely influenced heavily the Batman, the animated series theme song, which is my favorite Batman theme ever. And it's derived from that Danny Elfman theme that came with that movie.
Well, and those 3 notes they're so familiar for anyone who's watched that initial movie, to the tune that Andrew brought it up back in episode 5 when we talked about the Matrix and the Lego movie. He said, did anyone else hear the beginning, those 3 notes of the Batman scene when in the Lego movie? So you're absolutely right. Danny Elfman wrote such a great theme that it is intertwined in anything Batman moving forward from 1989.
Yeah, I mean, I can read a Batman comic, and when there's that splash page of Batman busting through the window and the shards of glass everywhere and the lightning striking behind him, I hear that song.
Yeah.
I hear those notes, right? Very iconic. The way they handled the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne in that movie is fantastic. It's iconic. Like the pearls dropping and bouncing off the asphalt. You can see it in your mind's eye right now. It was very well done and very memorable.
And did you remember that it was Tim Burton? I didn't remember that was Tim Burton. And they were very reluctant to give someone like Tim Burton the reins to Batman because they didn't want it to be dark. But Tim Burton's like, I promise you, this is going to make you a load of money. And at the end of the day, that's what the studios want. They want good stories, but they want to know that a family will still go and see this Batman. And this was rated R. It was not made for kids, but yet it made millions. And, Batman Returns, a sequel to that.
I didn't remember it was Tim Burton because as the sequels went, it got a little more Tim Burton-y with the props and the architecture and all the like kind of cartoonishly twisted and pointy angles and things that he likes to use.
Yes.
So yes, if I were to look at like the third one, I'd be like, oh yeah, it's Tim Burton as heck. But you're right. The first one was definitely a muted version. A couple more origins that I just wanted to pull out as far as things. If you're using this episode as a guide to like, well, I want to get more into Batman or I want to know more about Batman. What kind of things should I read? I will point you to Batman, the Animated Series. Absolutely fantastic. I think it came out in 1990. This to me showed just an epitome of these stories. They didn't word for word lift the stories of these villains from the comics, but they got the core of the characters really well done. And what it wasn't afraid to do as an animated series in 1990, which was something really new, was they didn't shy away from being tragic. Obviously, the Michael Keaton movie was the reason, right? It was so popular and it wasn't a happy-go-lucky fun time like Batman on guest starring on Scooby-Doo.
Right.
But a lot of the characters are tragic, especially the villains. When you get the story of Clayface, the popular actor who was in a terrible accident and he's just overrun with grief and disappointment and turns bad when he gets his powers. We'll talk later about Mr. Freeze and the core of each character and to a way that I feel like defined those characters going forward. And one of the really important things that it did was this is where Harley Quinn had her origin. This was a brand new character in the DC Batman universe that was introduced in the Batman animated series. There was no character Harley Quinn before that.
Really?
So thinking about how popular that character is now, know that the Batman animated series was where that character first appeared.
I was under the impression Harley Quinn had been at least in the comics before.
Nope. It is a animated series creation from everything from the overtones of her either bi or homosexuality with the way she interacts with characters on that show to her just dangerously troubling relationship with the Joker and how she is just consistently just in this abusive relationship that she can't see that her way getting out of, definitely in like a 90s family friendly way. But all of those things are there subtly that have created this just explosion of a character 30 years later.
That is so crazy. I would have assumed Harley Quinn was part of it. Like Harley Quinn and the Joker play off each other in real and troubling ways. Like you mentioned, I thought she was there a lot longer than that.
Another thing that I'll bring up as an origin, just because it was kind of out there, is there is a book. It was by Alan Moore, which people have their opinions about Alan Moore, called The Killing Joke. It's a popular book. I don't know that I would recommend it unless you're a certain type of comic book reader of a certain maturity level, probably, because it does have some troubling things in it. One of those troubling things is the Joker shooting Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, like coming to her apartment in a like home invasion style thing and shooting her point blank with a gun, which leaves her paralyzed. Huge big change for the character in this kind of one-off story. But what that did for comics was it paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and she became a character that could no longer flip around the rooftops throwing batarangs and fighting crime. Instead, she became Overwatch. She became the Watchtower. She became the trope that we see in so many superhero stories now of the person in the chair behind the scenes, hacking into the computers, looking at the traffic cams, giving the turn-by-turn directions. This is a storytelling trope that is everywhere now, whether it be in your superhero shows or your cop shows or whatever it might be. There's always the character of I think, was it the first Spider-Man movie of the modern cinematic universe, where Genki is like, I could be your guy in the chair.
Yes.
You know? And they just hang a lampshade on that trope. As far as I know, that was kind of the origin of that trope, was Batgirl became the Overwatch.
Did 007 do it first with M? Do you know if
Does M do that?
M is the leader of the actual police force / spice force, right? So M is the central communication point for 007. Well, let me back up and say, I'm not very versed in 007 either, but I have watched a handful of them where every gadget that James Bond has and every communication he has is with M and his assigned person that gives him all those gadgets. And here's this and here's that. And this is how you work this. And this car is equipped with this. And that's who he communicates with.
They all kind of start that way, right? Where they're at the headquarters and he's getting all of the, Chekhov's guns items at the beginning and kind of loading up. And like, here's this pen and it does this weird thing. And, an hour and a half from now, man, that pen is gonna be handy. But I'm talking about the earpiece in the battle, in the action. Turn right at the next block and you'll head him off of the thing. And like, oh no, there's somebody coming down the hallway, let me set the fire alarm, clickety clack on the keyboards, and then something happens. It's that in the moment sidekick partner that's not really there.
Okay.
Trope that I'm talking about.
You mean specifically like in action?
In the action, battle. That partner that's not there, the earpiece person that the hero depends on. Batman would have died 4 times if it hadn't been for the quick thinking of Barbara Gordon behind the keyboard and watching the cameras and those kinds of things.
Got it. Understood.
All right, the next thing that you put on the list was the most complete Batman story, what did you mean by that when you were dreaming up that category?
I had been thinking about conversations you and I had as you mentioning the Lego Batman movie as the most complete Batman movie. So when I hear that, I think full origin story, full all the way to the progression of being Batman to some sort of big battle or series of battles to however Batman ever ends, right? Unless Batman dies or decides he's not going to be a vigilante anymore. That complete instead of bits and pieces, like this is going to focus on his origin. This is going to focus on the rise of Batman. This is going to focus on, instead of all these bits and pieces, what's the most complete? And as you see on our notes, I don't have a suggestion for this. I can't think of one that tells us the entire story from front to end. And the closest I can think of is the early 2000s trilogy with The Dark Knight and all that. But it takes 3 movies to get us that full, complete, singular movie. It took the 3 movies to kind of complete that. So I'm interested in what you mean by the Lego Batman movie being the most complete.
It is incredible. It is amazing. It is almost just a perfect Batman movie. It is enjoyable on the sense you have everything there. There's Batman. He's dark and broody. He's a millionaire Bruce Wayne. He's got his butler there, Alfred. He recruits his sidekick, Robin. The Joker is causing trouble and it's very frustrating because he's trying to outsmart him, but he can't because he's so unpredictable, and so on and so forth. It's a good, complete movie, and it's a kid's movie. There's song and dance numbers. It's just incredible. But the more you know about Batman, the better it gets. They go through lengths to show you different Batman costumes, and the more outrageous, the better, as they're in the Batcave and they're looking at, the different costumes that are in the cases and stuff like that. And every one of those ridiculous costumes is an actual Batman costume from the comics that, oh my gosh, that's Rainbow Batman from 1968. Oh my gosh, that's the Dark Knight Batman when he had the all black and the this and that. And the villains, the Rogues Gallery is the same way. I mean, because of its animated nature and just kind of the meta of Lego collecting minifigures and the idea that they would parade out a minifigure of every Batman villain in history, from the ones that you're familiar with, like the Joker and Mr. Freeze and the Penguin, but to Kite Man and to Condiment King and these kinds of things, and make them front and center and give screen time to them is just, it's delightful on so many levels. And the Batman character is taking himself so seriously. Like a lot of the stories that we talk about, like when we talk about Batman by Frank Miller, when we talk about Batman by
Alan Moore,
thank you. The guy with the beard who lives in a cave, Alan Moore. Batman's so serious and he's so dark. And they're playing it that way the whole time, as just zany, cartoonish stuff is happening everywhere. And it's so delightful to see that serious Batman just have a light shined on it.
Okay, but take a step back. Tell me more about Condiment Man.
Condiment King, he's got a backpack. It's got some tanks on it. There's tubes that lead up to his guns. He's got ketchup in one. He's got mustard in the other, baby. Look out. He's going to cause some trouble.
Where did that character come from?
Man, he's going to kick down the door to your office building. He's going to start shooting ketchup and mustard all over your cubicles and stuff. Forget about it. What a menace.
So did he exist before the Lego Batman movie?
Absolutely, yes. All of them are absolutely from the comics in one form or another. And when you have a character that's been around for so long, it goes through so many different iterations with so many different authors. But yeah, for whatever cartoonish version of Batman Condiment King was in the Lego Batman movie, you see him right there next to the Joker and right there next to Calendar Man or whoever it might be. So
that Batman goes to New York and fights Condiment Man. I mean, Condiment King. That's just hilarious. I'm gonna be Googling this for a little while after we finish recording this episode. That's amazing.
That's another fun thing about the Batman movie is if you're watching that and you going in with the idea of like all of this stuff is canon, there's a lot for you to go search out after seeing it with just some of the silliness. They turn it into a love story with, they have all the classic love story tropes between Batman and the Joker, with the idea of, I think that starts in that Michael Keaton movie, right? Where you created me, I say I created you, one can't exist without the other, and they turn it into this love story towards the end. All the Joker really wants is for Batman to love him back, and Batman can't love because he's dark and broody. And it's so good. Can't recommend it enough.
Do the majority of the Batman stories have the Joker actually, quote unquote, created by Batman, acid incident that messes up his face? Is that a typical Joker story, or is that a twist for only a handful of them?
It's a twist for a handful of them. It's hard to say what is official canon because, again, there's so much content. I mean, the most recent Joker origin I read, I think, was in New 52. And in that, Joker was very, very old. And he had been around Gotham since it was an old West town. And he was using a hidden Lazarus pit beneath the city to keep himself alive. And that's what had driven him more and more mad. Previous to that, I thought canon was he was like a down on his luck guy, and he just had this really bad day where he lost his job and he didn't have any money and he was getting kicked out of his apartment. So he hooked up with the Red Hood gang and they were going to pull a heist at some chemical factory. And that's where his like Red Hood glass dome thing got broken and messed up his face. And then he fell in acid.
And you get that in the 2019 movie as well. Mostly, well, they didn't name the Red Mask Society or whatever in the 2019 Joaquin Phoenix Joker. I really appreciated that twist or that little deviation from the canon in that it's just this normal dude who has some mental problems and it uses like a blanket of current society and that mental problem going unchecked. He can't get help because of the way the system works. And so he starts to rage against the system and nothing actually happens to his face. He makes himself up that way as he progresses down his insanity. And as he continues to get kicked down by a system that has pretty much thrown him away. So I really appreciate that, as I think Joker is scariest when we don't exactly know his origin story.
Oh yeah, the Heath Ledger Joker, where in every scene he tells the story differently about what happened, is absolutely brilliant. I mean, that is my favorite Joker right there, because you can't tell. The thing for me that is the scariest about Joker is how unpredictable he is. And I think that's one of the main things that frustrates Batman as detective is it's not that he's getting outsmarted necessarily. It's that he can't predict. There is no rhyme or reason to the chaos this murderous psychopath is doing. That's my scariest Joker. I think a lot of people our age would say that if we were to ask them the Joker's villain, they would go back to the Michael Keaton movie where they made the story that it was the young Joker who shot Bruce Wayne's parents, which was an interesting, that was, as far as I know, that was not the mainstream comics origin at the time, or if whether or not he even had one, which is a questionable decision really on the filmmakers. It's kind of it's like that Star Wars problem, right? Where everyone has to be a Skywalker. It's like, no, right. Not everybody has to be.
Well, and they brought that circle back around in the 2019 Joker movie, right? Because this version of Joker happens when Bruce Wayne is a child, because that movie, and spoiler, if you've not seen the movie, towards the end of that movie, the believers behind the Joker who start trending chaos around the city murder the Waynes. And that kicks off the Batman story separately to the Joker story. So in that version, the Joker already exists while Bruce Wayne is a child, and then you can make your own conclusions on what happens in that timeline. So that's an interesting comeback around in how the Joker and the Batman have always been intertwined in some point of origin and some way connected on how their stories are told in these different movies, comics, books.
So since we're talking about the Joker, why don't we roll into the next category you had listed here, which was best villain? And why don't you start with yours, since we're on this train already?
I was about to say the same thing. We're on the same page, best friend. Yes, best villain for me is Heath Ledger playing the Joker. And for some of the reasons that we've already talked about, he is a man that just wants chaos. Unpredictable, unforgiving, violent, but to the extent that you don't know the violence is coming. It's chilling how easily violent and murderous he is. And you don't know why. You don't know why this guy exists, except his whole point is to provide chaos. We all know, sadly, Heath Ledger passed away shortly after the making of this film. I was a fan of Heath Ledger for a very long time before he played the Joker. If you follow his personal storyline, some of the lack of sleeping and reasons for taking the pills he was taking, a lot of people put it on his little bit of descent into madness in playing the Joker. He was such a thorough, complete actor. And this character just has no scruples. He's more than a psychopath. He was just played so brilliantly. And you go through the course of this movie, he's played so perfectly because he doesn't have an actual purpose. He just uses Batman to create chaos. And in fact, there's a line from this movie that the character Alfred says that I actually have used in real life as we see not great things happen in the world. Some men just want to watch the world burn. And it's a perfect description of what I think is the perfect villain. And to be totally honest, I'm a fan of the really campy versions of some of these movies. The Batman Forever, Val Kilmer with Jim Carrey playing a very over-the-top Riddler. I love that movie. But really? The Riddler is fun and it's entertaining and it's just so over the top. It's like watching a bad version of a comic book come to life, but it's not a best villain era. Like Heath Ledger is just perfect as the Joker. And just my favorite scene is when he's confronting the mob after he's stolen all their money. And you've got this whole room of very murderous men and he has no fear of them. And one comes at him and he goes, "Want to see a magic trick?" Sticks the pencil and boom. Like, I know. But
I can't even with that.
It is so calm and murderous. And how does one little skinny, funny looking dude stop an entire room of mobsters in a matter of seconds? You don't expect it. And he goes on like it's nothing. It's just boom, body on the floor. Okay. Now do you want to talk business? It's so perfectly played and it's so antagonizing to Batman and using Batman to just create more chaos. I think it's brilliant.
And like you said, no motivation. There's also that amazing scene where he burns the giant pyramid of money in front of all those gangsters and stuff. And it's like, this is not the motivation.
He does not
can't
care.
Figure him out.
Yeah. And we never get a chance to, which I really think they would have gone there had Heath Ledger not passed away at the end of the movie. I have a feeling we would have seen more Joker in the third movie of that trilogy, but he just doesn't care. He just wants death and chaos. And that is just brilliant to use Batman as an antagonizer in the want of nothing but destruction.
Before I move on to mine, I'm going to give a quick tip just because you mentioned the Riddler, who is not anywhere else on this page, and that you like the Riddler. I'm going to point out Batman Zero Year. It's similar to the title of Year One, but this is something completely different. It's called Batman Zero Year, and it just gives you this cold open. There was some sort of apocalyptic event in Gotham City, where Gotham City was literally walled off and closed off from the rest of the world because things just got so crazy there. It's sometime later where the earth has recovered. There's vines and things growing all over the buildings. Everything's kind of dilapidated and post-apocalyptic. Everybody who could have gotten out got out, but some people were trapped there. So it's just this very dystopian version of Gotham City. And Batman is racing around with a crossbow on his back on a dirt bike with like purple fingerless gloves, and it's a Riddler story, and it's very different. It's not something that you normally see, and it's a lot of fun, and it's just stunning visually. Best villain.
Yes.
I had two. I couldn't decide. Mr. Freeze from the animated series is a perfect example of that tragic villain that's part of Batman's rogues gallery. Scientist, was doing cancer research. He was trying to make breakthroughs, and his wife was dying of cancer. And so he's using his research to try to figure out, different ways that he can make her last longer. And as a scientist, he comes to the realization that he is not going to cure this disease and he cannot save his wife. So he instead turns his motivations to preserving her in sort of like a cryostasis type thing, right? Like freezing her. And we know that doesn't work in real life, but the idea of him trying to come up with a way so that he could put his wife into some sort of frozen suspended animation so that someday when he could figure it out, he could save her before she dies, right? And so he spends all the time on that. When you're a scientist and you're working for a large corporation like Wayne Enterprises, they expect results. Where's our cancer research? None of this looks like cancer research. This is cryogenics. What are you doing? You're shut down. Your funding is gone. Get out of here. And so he loses his wife. They shut down the experiment. They shut down his research. He doesn't have the facility to keep his wife alive in the cryostasis. And of course, there's a big fight and there's an accident. And now he's Mr. Freeze. And everything he then does is to keep this lab going and getting his wife and putting her back in the cryo freezer, and he's just developing all this, and he doesn't have funding anymore. He needs the money. Can't you see what I'm trying to do will help everybody eventually? But and this madness that he descends into, and it doesn't end happy. There's no like, oh, Batman figures out how to save his wife and cure cancer. It's a tragic story, and I think it was a very bold move for the animated series to do that back in 1991 or whatever it was, during the afternoon where kids were all watching cartoons. He's a sympathetic villain is the word I'm looking for there. Not just tragic, but sympathetic. And then the other one that I put on my list, because I think it's cool, is from the story arc, Batman the Long Halloween. And the villain there is, they call it the Holiday Killer. But what's cool about the Holiday Killer as a villain is this book shows Batman as the detective. From his origins, Batman was supposed to be a detective, right? Like if you go back, it was Batman, world's greatest detective. And over time, as things evolved and changed, Batman isn't really a detective anymore. In some situations, Batman is in space punching aliens next to Superman and Green Lantern, right? Like he's gone very far from, this is too much for the police. I can figure this out myself because I'm this super rich guy with all the cool computers and equipment and all the forensics and things that I can do, which kind of carried over to the 66 show a little bit. Like he would always have the Bat computer and he'd put a little punch card in and a punch card would come out and be like, the fingerprints match the such and such. It was because Batman was originally supposed to be a detective, a vigilante detective. And in this story, The Long Halloween, he has to go back to being a detective because there are killings that are happening on holidays, these brutal murders. He can't figure out what the connection is. He's going to all the places where he thinks it should be, right? Like, Calendar Man, you're killing these people, admit it. And it's like, it's not Calendar Man. And he keeps going back, like, are you sure it's not Calendar Man? And he has to go back and he has to use the clues and he has to figure it out. And you as the reader are going along with it. And you're seeing the things in the panels that are consistent from one murder to the next. And it's a cool Batman villain because it forces Batman to be not just a dude who punches, but a detective.
He's not responding to crisis in action. He has to put the pieces together and solve the puzzle.
Exactly. There's a serial killer out there and he has to try to get ahead of it. And he fails. He fails and he fails and he fails. And he might get a little closer each time, but that's different from a lot of the over the top Batman, big tough guy, I bust through the window and punch you, right. Stories.
Well, going into that, because that does sound very entertaining, Holiday Killer from Batman, The Long Halloween, most entertaining Batman story.
I didn't want to put the Lego Batman movie on the list again, but it could definitely have been in this category as well.
Fair enough.
I want to have fun with Batman, I mean, that's the way I gotta go because I just love it so much. Instead, I chose something that was just ridiculous. It is the epitome of that Batman as male power fantasy. It is what came to be known as Dick Batman. Like, Batman is just the worst. And it's written that way. And I feel like it was probably written that way non-ironically. I think Frank Miller was like, I'm going to give the darkest, grittiest, most hardcore Batman anybody's ever seen. And it's going to be awesome. And when you read it, it's like, who is this guy? You know, it is so over the top. It's absolutely bonkers. It's the one where, you know, Dick Grayson's parents die in the circus in their trapeze act and Batman comes and throws them in the Batmobile and they're driving down the road. And this kid is like, who are you? What is this car? What are you wearing? Are you wearing a cape? What is wrong with you? And it's the one where Batman turns to him and goes, what are you? I'm the damn Batman. It's that. And I'm sure when it was written, it was going to be like, oh my gosh, this is going to be, and it's just ridiculous, over the top, hardcore Batman. It's the Batman where he has sex with Black Canary on the docks. We kissed. She tastes like tobacco. We leave the masks on. Like, it's that Batman. And it's every frame stupid. It's so over the top. So it's not a recommendation. It's not a good Batman, but for most entertaining, if you go into it knowing how come Batman's the way he is in the new Batman movie. If you want to know why the Ben Affleck Batman is the way the Ben Affleck Batman is with the, like, how come you have a yellow bat symbol on your chest? Because I can't armor my head. Like, that Batman came from this book.
I only watched maybe 30 minutes of one of the Ben Affleck Batman movies. I just couldn't get into it. And maybe that's why. Maybe I need to read that comic book first.
You can read it two ways. You can read it and just get angry at it that this misogynistic person who puts children in danger and is just an absolute selfish psychopath, and you can be mad at it. Or you can just, oh, really? This is Batman now, huh? I don't know. I find it super entertaining, but I love it ironically.
It's an interesting point of view, at least, right? Like, if you think of someone who is rich and has a tragic background story that went unattended throughout their childhood and adolescence and adulthood, you can imagine, as a vigilante, I could get away with anything. I could do whatever I want. It kind of makes sense. Batman's not Captain America. He's not Superman. He's not the beacon of citizenry. He's a model nothing. He is full of vengeance and anger and pain. And even Christian Bale plays this character a little bit like this. You think of how over the top he is when he lands on the roof of his own building in a helicopter and exits with 3 models on either side of him as he's hosting a fundraiser for Harvey Dent. And he's just over the top privilege. and ego. That certainly is a piece of Batman that needs to be told.
If you want to know where and when Batman became a this is the one. This is the one.
Well, I'll say for most entertaining for me, as I mentioned before, I love the campy, I think it's Batman Forever with Val Kilmer and Jim Carrey. And I can't remember right now who plays Harvey Dent in that movie. Robin is introduced in the movie. It's a bad movie. It was an opposite switch. It was, look at all this money the Michael Keaton movie made, but then the third one didn't make so much. So maybe people are getting really tired of the dark. So let's make it more like a comic book. And as you mentioned, Tim Burton started making it more comic booky. And I think this movie was really just, we're going to do something that's more family friendly. We're going to make it look like a comic book. I remember seeing interviews of exactly that. This was also somewhere towards around the time I graduated high school. So I remember just all the hype and hoopla about they made it more like a comic book, and they certainly did. There's just neon colors and bright lights, and they kind of brush over Batman's origin story.
The costumes were shiny. This is the one that had the nipples, right?
Yes, the big deal was the nipples on the costume, on the Batman batsuit. Yeah.
And they had like the metallics, all the trim was like a metallic. Robin would have his black suit, but then the red accents were just like shiny and metallic. And the domino masks were all chunky and big.
Yes. Yes. And I just remember Jim Carrey had short, spiky, really orange hair and his green, like super tight. You could see his junk suit with the big question marks. And he was carrying around that ridiculous cane. And like, it was just over the top. To me, it's entertaining. I also love, at that time, a very popular TV series. One of my favorite TV shows was Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman with Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher. In that time, they played off of each other a little bit, like who's going to be more popular. And there's a scene in an episode of the Superman show where Lois Lane blurts out like, it's not like everyone knows you're Superman. And he says, Lois, why don't you say it a little bit louder? I don't think they heard you in Gotham. And then in that movie, they make some nod to, you know, he's got to be halfway to Metropolis by now. So they played off of each other. And again, not a serious Batman movie. I just loved the play. And later in the movie, when Robin has his actual suit and they're in the last little final climb to the big battle, Chris O'Donnell says, "Holy rusted metal, Batman," as a throwback to the television shows. And Batman kind of turns around and looks at him and goes, "It's metal and it's all holy and rusted." Like, it's so campy and bad. I love it. I'm entertained every time I watch it. I'll watch it after we record this podcast. I can't not be entertained at how bad and campy and just fun that it is. Again, don't recommend it if you've not watched it. But for me, it just ties into maybe that time period of my life. I don't know. I like it. I'm entertained when I watch it.
I wonder if that movie would be served better as a live performance, like a stage show, because of how over the top it is, because of how deliberate those like silly lines are. That's the one that has Arnold Schwarzenegger in it too, right? All like, "Nice to meet you."
He's in the sequel of this.
Oh, okay.
He's in the second movie of this little, and I actually didn't watch the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but yeah, it's that same idea, same trope, same tone. Yeah.
I don't think I want to watch that.
You're done shaking your head at me. How about best sidekicks?
There's so many. There's so many. Right now, I'd be most excited about Orphan. Orphan is a sidekick whose parents are villains, and she's a complicated character. She barely speaks because she's gone through a lot of traumatic events, but she appreciates beauty, and she's a dancer, and she's also that trope of the very diminutive little girl who goes into a room just full of thugs, and then the camera pans away, and when it comes back, there's 30 dead people on the floor, and she's covered with blood. Just really, really cool. So Orphan right now, I say like, man, I'm really hot on Orphan as a sidekick right now. But for the list, I'm going to go to Carrie Kelly from The Dark Knight Returns. This is another Frank Miller story, but was written much earlier than, than the other one. It is one of the first really like dark, broody, like Batman stories that I read when I was probably in 8th grade. It was a different kind of Batman than we'd ever seen before, and he's still kind of a but Carrie Kelly is a Robin, and she's a young teenage girl, and Batman is old, and he's tired, and the city is just the worst. Gotham City is that version of cities we saw in the 80s when we saw things like RoboCop, the way Detroit was portrayed in RoboCop, or Escape from New York, where just the city, it's just teeming with crime and all this stuff. And that's the Gotham that she's living in. And the way that they succeed is because she does everything the old man expects. And when he makes a plan, she makes sure that it's followed and that the thing happens. If the bomb has to go off at this certain time, obviously she runs into a million different obstacles and crazy things, but that bomb goes off on time. When Batman gets in trouble, who comes to the rescue but little Carrie Kelly? They have this moment. There's this scene of, again, like Frank Miller drawn ridiculously huge, all puffy muscle Batman and little tiny Carrie Kelly. He calls her good soldier. And that's what she is. She is the Robin that is a good soldier. She is the sidekick that he needed to get things done, and she always does. And she's super cute. And so I chose Carrie Kelly from the list. The opposite of Carrie Kelly is Damian Wayne. Damian Wayne is Batman's son, whose mother is Talia al Ghul, Ra's al Ghul's daughter, who is just the worst. He is super smug. He is rebellious. He cannot understand his father's ridiculous rule of not killing people because his mom is a leader of an assassin cult. Right. So he's constantly out there with like his katana sword wanting to chop people up, and Batman's got to reel him back all the time, and he's always complaining, but he's just a punk. He's just a punk kid who's absolutely the worst. That character then challenges Batman in a different way. Right, because it's not something Batman can punch, and it's not something Batman can throw in jail. It's his son, and his son just pushes his buttons, and that makes for a fun dynamic. So even though Damian Wayne is just the worst, he's also a pretty fun sidekick. Super Sons is a fantastic book where it is little Jonathan Kent, Superman's son, and Damian Wayne teaming up on adventures and how different they are. And it's a fun character to play off people like Batman, to play off people like Jonathan Kent and these kind of things. So I'm going to throw Damian Wayne in there as well.
I didn't put any in this category because I don't have a lot of knowledge, but I will say in just a little bit of research that I have done, I think we're very, very, unless you can correct me, we're very sorely missing good quality Batgirl or a good quality Catwoman. Both of those have been attempted to be introduced in some of the media and things I've read and seen, but again, not done well. I think Alicia Silverstone was Batgirl, and that did not go well, and I can't even say that I ever saw the movie. They had Halle Berry as Catwoman once, and they had Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman once. They were played more as a sexual innuendo for Batman rather than strong female character. I think unless hopefully someone can write in and let us know what's a good example of a female sidekick. I do like that there's a female Robin that you mentioned with Carrie Kelly. That's very intriguing, but that's also just a take on a character that was traditionally male. So I'm interested in a good female sidekick that actually exists for Batman in the way of Batgirl or Catwoman or someone who's just not there to tease Batman.
Well, I've got good news for you. I think you will be very impressed and enjoy Catwoman in the Batman Rebirth arc. The Catwoman stuff is probably more towards like the third, fourth, fifth volume of it. I think it wasn't what it started with, but it is a very long arc leading up to the wedding between Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne, and all the arcs of them working together and coming to an understanding. And can Batman be happy? Can a criminal marry a superhero? Can they be, if they stop playing games and get serious, is this a real relationship that can work? And those kinds of things. And I think it was really well done. Lots of news around it. Very cool moments as far as Catwoman becoming that complex character that has a past, and also, just the way that she exists in the world. But it also has like really cutesy moments too between them that you never get in a modern Batman story, right? You never would get any kind of cute, heartfelt moments. But sure enough, there's like an issue where Clark Kent and Lois Lane and Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle double date to the fair, and like little things like that, like that you would never see. But it makes the characters richer. Some of those stories are really good.
One of my favorite things about this podcast too is just getting to have these conversations with you. That's very helpful to me for something to check out on something that I feel is not obviously available to the person who's not following all the Batman things. So thank you for that.
Last one we've got here is the best Batman gadget. You want me to go first? You want to go first?
I will go first because I feel like I cheated a little bit with this category, and I went with the Injustice video games. If you've never played these games before, they are just a blast to play, and every character in it has some sort of special attack montage, and Rob's son Andrew is really pro at this game, so he's unlocked a whole bunch of characters in the newest version of the game, and he's gotten to the point where neither of us can beat him anymore, so it's just infuriating. But Batman is one of the more fun characters to play on Injustice because the gadgets that he has to throw out in that Mortal Kombat type style one-on-one battle. I think Batman has just so many fun gadgets and specials, and his montage is insane, and all the bats that come flying around. I mean, he's really fun to play. I think he's a little slow, which is why for me he's hard to win on the game, but if you can nail down all of his specials, all the gadgets he has in that game are just phenomenal, and all absolutely geared around to who Batman is as a quote unquote superhero.
It is super fun. And I think, I can't remember if it's the first one or the second one where his finishing move is he swoops down in the bat jet and like picks you up and flies up into the sky. And it does that thing that was from the Val Kilmer movie where the bat plane flies in front of the full moon and makes the bat symbol and then kind of free falls down into the air.
I think that's the first one because it doesn't end as dramatically, but his montage special attack in the second one is just mind-boggling. I think that's the first one. Yeah. It's so good. It's ridiculous. Injustice. Go play it.
All right. So I said that I would cover the gamut, and I don't want anybody to get the impression that I just enjoy dark, broody Batman written by Frank Miller. My favorite Batman gear is the Bat Shark Repellent.
I was thinking Sharknado. Did I miss something? What is this?
Bat Shark Repellent. I'm going to get this wrong, but just imagine the scene. 1966 Batman. You've got the Joker. You've got the Riddler. Everybody's teaming up for the Batman movie, right? The big Batman movie. Right, and that's the one where Batman is running around with the like cartoonish bomb, right? That's just like the big black circle with a fuse coming out of it. And he grabs the bomb from the building and he runs out into the streets and he's got to get rid of this bomb. And he turns down one side. There's a mom with a little stroller. Oh, and you got to turn around and he runs down the street the other way. And there's a pack of nuns in their habits running down the thing. And he runs back down the other way. Sometimes you just can't get rid of a bomb. And I think eventually he runs down to the docks and throws the bomb in the water and then somehow ends up in the water. And again, I'm going to get it wrong because it's been so long, but somehow ends up in the ocean surrounded by sharks, which are like literally foam triangles that someone underwater.
Yeah.
So you're around. Out of the utility belt, pulls out a big hairspray can with a giant cartoonish sign on it that says Bat Shark Repellent and starts spraying it around. And good thing I brought my Bat Shark Repellent, old chum.
How does it even work underwater? I have so many questions. Batman power. Batman power.
All you need to know is it is Batman. How does that work, Batman?
Because Batman. Amazing.
It's Batman.
Amazing.
I love watching movies where you can tell the people making the movie were having fun. And that, from the writer's room to the prop makers to the set designers to the actors, are just going for it. This is going to be the silliest, most ridiculous. What could be? So then how would he get out of that one? Bat Shark Repellent. And you even think about like the word. Does it repel bat sharks? What's going on?
Like you have the naysayer in the writers who are like, how do we get out of this? Well, Bat Shark Repellent. Bat Shark Repellent? That would never work. Of course it'll work. It's Batman.
Again, there is so much Batman out there. I would love to hear, again, another call to action. I would love to hear from some listeners about their favorite Batman origin story, their favorite, what they think is the most complete Batman, their favorite Batman villain and why, their most entertaining story, their best Batman gadget, all the things we talked about. Please share your opinions, because as soon as I start reading them and see other people's perspectives, I know I'm going to be like, oh my God, I love that one too. So that is Batman.
So Rob, What is the nerdiest thing you did this week?
Oh my gosh, the nerdiest thing that I have been up to since last podcast is I have become addicted to War Game Vault, which is a website that hosts independent games creators for the most part, very small company or independent companies that produce their games. A lot of the stuff that I've been looking at is skirmish games. We've talked before about my love of little plastic dudes, all my miniatures and all this terrain and stuff that I 3D print and the scenery and everything. And this website is just full of PDFs of rule sets and scenarios that people have written for these types of games. Many of them are miniature agnostic, which means they are selling a rule set, but they're not also selling models to go with it. You use the models you have. So this one is called Song of Blades and Heroes, and it's a fantasy game, and you need elves and dwarves and whatever. Use the miniatures you've got. This one's called Space Weirdos, and there's aliens and there's space army guys. Use whatever miniatures you want or you have. And so I have just been digging into that place and reading so many little rule sets of all these fun independent games. Sometimes they call them heartbreakers, which is a term that was new to me over the last little bit. A heartbreaker is when you take something like most popularly like Dungeons and Dragons, right? You have Dungeons and Dragons, world's most popular role-playing game, but you think you could simplify it, or you think you could do it a little different, or I love Dungeons and Dragons except for the way they do this. So I'm going to rewrite a D20 system and do it the way I want to do it, or the way that I think makes sense. And that's the heartbreaker. And it just makes my heart happy because I do play a lot of games, but most of the games that I've been exposed to are the mainstream games for the bigger companies, right? Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Warhammer, these kinds of things. And none of them are perfect, right? I always go, well, I do like this game, but man, it takes a really long time. I really like this game, but if you don't get to go first, a lot of times that just means that you lose. And the other thing is the time. Right? Well, I'd like to play that game, but it's going to take me 4.5 hours out of my afternoon. And people have fixed all those problems, for all of these different games and stuff. So I have been loving War Game Vault and nickel and diming all of these little PDFs. Oh, this one's only $3.99. Oh, that one's only $7.99. Oh, that one's only $4.99. And falling asleep every night reading all these rule sets that I can no longer keep straight in my head.
That's fantastic. I like the term heartbreakers. That's an interesting way to use someone who's adapting a game for whatever reasons. That's a good term. For me, on my notes, I put last week you and your family came over, we grilled and we're hanging out by the pool and we played a new game that you bought, a new dice game with chips. And that was really fun. But as we were here and talking about the episode, something that happened today, I'm going to say my partner met me. We met at a time when we were in the middle of this pandemic. So a lot of things weren't typical or usual. When we moved in together, why do you have so many hats? I am absolutely a nerd about baseball caps. And so something I did earlier, because it's the kickoff to the NFL season, is take out we have this whole tree that kind of acts as a mini mud room, because you don't really need a mud room in Southern California as much as you do in other places. You even know what I mean by mud room? It's so uncommon. I do. Okay. Because I didn't know what a mud room was till I moved to the Midwest. So
I've seen them on TV.
Yeah, there you go. So everywhere in the Midwest, we have a mud room. What the hell is a mud room? It makes sense because you've got your big sloppy shoes from the snow and the salt and all that stuff. But I digress. I have a little hall tree that's like a mini mud room, and I have a box under there that's full of hats. And then I have another thing that slides under my bed that's full of hats. And I went through and rearranged them because I wear the hats by season. So it's football season. I made sure my USC hats and my 49ers hats were towards the front, and I moved all my Lakers hats and Kings hats. And I know we're hockey season, but I won't start wearing the King stuff just out of superstition till it's playoffs. Dodgers, I'll keep the Dodger near the front, but again, I'm superstitious. I'm going to wait till it's playoffs. And so I have a whole system to wearing hats. I'm very nerdy about baseball caps. I even have my 805 beer hat that only comes out on certain occasions. And that's mostly due to the fact that we are educators in a relatively small town, and walking around with beer logo is probably not the greatest thing for students to see their assistant principal around town with. So I'm a nerd about hats.
Young listener, make sure at school tomorrow you tell Dr. Alvarez what the nerdiest thing you did this week was.
Oh, I would love it if a kid came up to me in class or not in class, but on campus and asked that. I would totally have a conversation with them. But yeah, the nerdiest thing I did was rearrange my baseball hat collection corrections so I can be ready for the sports seasons, because I am a baseball cap nerd and a sport nerd. So that's the nerdiest thing I did this week.
Yeah, baseball cap nerd is totally a thing. I had a student, and it didn't take long to notice that this student had a different ball cap on every day. You know, it was the start of the year, you don't really notice, but then you start noticing, like, I don't think I've ever seen that kid wear the same hat twice. And I knew he was a baseball player. So I asked him one time, I was like, so I noticed you wear a lot of different hats. Yeah. Are they all team hats that you've been playing? Because I know you've been playing baseball forever. He goes, no, those hats are dirty. I just wear those to play. This is my hat collection. I was like, all right, my dude. I love it.
Did you ever look at his hats in conjunction?
Twice as many hats as I thought he did.
How many did he have?
I mean, it seemed like so many that he could not wear one for so long, to a point that once I saw it again, I didn't remember that he had worn it the first time. Probably every Major League Baseball team and just a ton of minor league baseball team, which those are fun hats to see. Minor League Baseball logos and team names are fantastic. So whenever I got to see some of those, it was very exciting.
Oh, I certainly have a Toledo Mud Hens hat as well.
Yeah.
That it's all white, so I don't wear it very often. Hats are a thing, being a hat collector. I'm a mini hat collector because I really only collect teams that I root for, with some exceptions, like places I've gone to. And I think I have a Statue of Liberty hat. Like, I definitely am a hat nerd. With students like that in particular, did you ever notice like the connection with their shoes? Because you get those really particular ones where they're wearing a pristine certain color and it's a perfect match to their Nikes or whatever sneakers they're wearing. Like, that's the real deal.
I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know people like that. In fact, there was a teacher I worked with who was like that. Right. His shirt always matched his shoes. I can't remember if he wore Puma or Adidas, which is another whole big controversy for shoe nerds.
Right.
But
yes.
they were the white shoe and they had the color stripe along the side.
Right.
And he had every color because shoes got to match your shirt. But no, for the young kids that I taught, they didn't have the money to invest quite yet, but they're working on it. So when they got to high school, that was their drip for sure.
And I'm telling you, I am going to add a Seattle Kraken hat because the artwork is just phenomenal. I'm going to get one. That's the nerdiest thing I did last week. How about the nerdiest thing you're going to do this week, Rob?
So a few episodes ago, I think I mentioned that I was reproducing all of the Castle Ravenloft board game tiles from their flat cardboard tile to a 3D printed modular system. I have finished printing all of those. I haven't finished painting them all, but I only have like 7 left, I think, out of the 52 tile deck. So that project is almost done. That project is coming to an end. And so I have a new big 3D printer project that I'm going to start. The other day, we learned that one of our friends who we play D&D with on Wednesday nights, who is also an administrator, I think it's the first campaign she's ever played. I think I've played like a couple one-shots with her over the years, but this is her first like regular game that we've been playing for almost a year now, every week. And she loves it and started a D&D club at her high school and found an advisor, and she's got a bunch of students involved, and she's got 2 or 3 students that are willing to run games for the club and those kinds of things. Oh, it all started because she's having so much fun with us on Wednesday night. Like, that makes me really happy. So what can I do to help this project, help this little club out? And so it's like, well, do I give them money? Do I get them books? They probably, if they're nerds, they probably already have the books. Well, of course, because we've also talked about my bad relationship / addiction to Kickstarters. I have backed a bunch of Kickstarters that are 3D printable dice tower patterns, right? Like STL files. Yes. You have one.
Yes.
My son's got a different one. I've got a different one. I've given them as gifts before. And I just backed another project that has another new, like 10 different designs. And I was thinking like, oh, what if I printed and hand painted a few super cool dice towers that our friend could give as presents to those students who ran games, or those students that really like helped others and those kinds of things, like a thank you gift that is more than just like, well, here's a book you probably already have, or here's some dice that you probably don't need, but something unique and something handmade. So that is my next big nerdy project. I'm going to do that as a donation to their club.
That's amazing. I'm going to offer up some sets of dice for the club to keep instead of the individual students. So I'll reach out to you and offer that. I think that's amazing. More kids being able to meet over D&D on a high school campus at that is just phenomenal. And the ripples that'll cause as they move on after high school and maybe start D&D groups as they go to college or become adults. That's just so fun. It's a heart warmer instead of a heartbreaker to tie your two things together. For me, the nerdiest thing I'm doing this week. So the end of October is USC homecoming. That's where I graduated from. And as a reminder, I have been a musician for a long time. I've played the trumpet now for 33 years. I started at 10 years old. And that carried me to high school. That carried me through college. That carried me through my career as a band director. But it has been a little while since I seriously played. I played in a couple of semi-pro groups here in California, in Vegas, and then when I was getting my doctorate in Toledo. But I haven't played in some time seriously. And at the end of October for USC's homecoming, Dr. Bartner was the director there for 50 years, from 1970 to 2020. And he retired. And because of the pandemic last year, they did not have his big farewell alumni event. They are inviting 50 years of alumni to play at halftime of the football game at the end of October. It might be the largest marching band ever to be assembled and perform. I have to get my chops back up if I'm going to attempt to play 4 or 5 tunes with the Trojan Marching Band. So I started on Friday, and next week I have to commit to at least 10, 15 minutes a day I'll go outside at the end of the school day when everyone's gone and run through some warm-ups and some etudes and just get my chops back up. A bunch of the band kids that were hanging out for the football game last Friday were all walking through the quad and staring at me because they've heard me say that I play the trumpet, but they've never actually heard me play the trumpet. So pretty nerdy to step out there with the current shoes I have as a school administrator and to play my trumpet every day, at least the next 5 days, so I can start rebuilding those muscles and not just, otherwise I'll get to the game and play through a song. And just like any other muscle, if you try to lift 100 pounds after not lifting for a year, you're not going to be able to do it. So I don't want to go and blow my chops after the first song.
It's the Nerd Podcast. We can't lift 100 pounds as it is.
I mean, if we worked our way to it, we could. We nerded out and lifted every day. That's what I'm saying.
You're a fitness nerd.
We could become a fitness nerd. I was for a little while. And
is this game going to be televised?
It is. And they might even live televise the halftime show because of they're looking to see how many people are going to register to come. For me, the nerdiest thing this coming week is going to be practicing my trumpet like a good trumpet student should.
All right. So next week, we are going to do a Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode, maybe a top 5. Oh boy, you love Buffy. You're going to be the expert on this one.
We're going to do a role reversal for sure. You were the expert on Batman much more than me. What I really love about talking about Buffy with you is that you watched it as a full-grown adult. I watched it when I was 19 and in college and have followed the series live where we had to wait. Used to have my roommates record it on a VHS tape because I worked on Tuesday nights when it used to play and would come back at 10 o'clock at the end of work and watch it with my roommate. So we have some very different perspectives of the episodes because I can put it in context of the time and you can put it in context of being a full-grown adult. So I'm looking forward to it. And I kept that top 5 ambiguous. I'm going to let you for yourself decide what your top 5, could it be top 5 episodes, top 5, whatever. And I'm going to have my top 5 list as well. And it's going to be fun to talk about the universe that is Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Right. Well, I have found a driving resource for myself. I found a really cool article called Buffy the Vampire Slayer, an episode roadmap for beginners. And this is by Juliet Harrison, and it was on denofgeek.com. Who knows? Back in 2017, she put this out. But what's so cool about it is she put together, so she made different watch orders depending on how you want to watch it. It almost assumes that you're someone like me who has seen it before, but maybe you want to go back and touch on the highlights. So there's a playlist of episodes of all 7 seasons that she made called The Slayer's Journey, which are just the episodes that deal with Buffy as the Slayer. There's another playlist for high school. If you want to go back and see all the high school drama episodes, here's a playlist. There's one all about Angel, the longest one that's all about like beginning to end the apocalypses and where all of those things keep all the like hellmouth things and all the overarching villains and stuff kind of link together so you can see the progression from beginning to end. So of course, being a nerd, I have taken that article and instead of looking at an internet article, which is full of ads and weird garbage, I made a spreadsheet and color coded it so that I can look through there to get my starting point going. And I will finish putting all of that together and probably give a link so you can put it in the notes next time if you want to start watching some Buffy the Vampire Slayer after we talk about it next week.
This is amazing. And for the listeners, while we are recording, Rob shared his screen of this slide. I'm imagining the different colors are the different seasons.
Seasons, yes.
Very good. And I'm a nerd enough about it. I can see the episode titles and know which season they're from because I've watched the entire series so many times. That's amazing. I really like that idea, especially because one of the complaints of the first two seasons and as it moves along is there's certainly episodes that are in there for brevity. There's episodes in there because early on, Joss Whedon was required to put in something, oh, this is a teen show becoming more popular. You absolutely have to put in an episode about alcohol being bad for teens. So he wrote a really horrible episode called Beer Bad as a protest. So I really like this idea that you can look through. I really like this idea for everything. We talked about this with the MCU too, how Disney Plus now categorizes MCU. If you want to see the Iron Man chain, here's the order of movies you should watch. So this is wonderful.
I believe that brings us to a close.
Listener, do you have something to say about this episode? Join in on the conversation. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at NerdBestFriends, or send us a message by writing to nerdbestfriends@gmail.com. More than anything, please make sure to like, follow, and share our podcast. We are now on Apple Podcasts, so go on, follow us, subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and come back in 2 weeks for our newest episode.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, Rob. See y'all later.
The newest ones, it's got the Batman in it, and he's played by the guy who's with the other guy all the time. And they did that one movie with Robin Williams, and then the other guy was the Bourne Identity. But then this guy, he was from Southie, and every day, the best day of his life is going to be the day when I show up and you're not there.
The Ben Affleck movies?
Ben Affleck!
I am keeping all of that in, by the way. That's just amazing.
No!